All right. Thank you so much. My name is Raya Conrad Bradshaw. I am the VP of Corporate Markets here at Cengage Group and a deep partner with Infosec on all of the talent offerings that we are bringing. And I'm here to moderate this panel today. We really want to spend most of our time talking to the experts. I am thrilled to introduce our speakers. Keatron Evans is a cybersecurity and workforce development expert with over 17 years of experience in penetration testing, incident response, and information security management for federal agencies and Fortune 500 organizations. He is VP of Portfolio and Product Strategy at Infosec, where he empowers the human side of cybersecurity with cyber knowledge and skills to outsmart cybercrime. Keatron is an established researcher, instructor, and speaker, and lead author of the best-selling book, Chained Exploits: Advanced Hacking Attacks from Start to Finish. And he regularly speaks at major industry events like RSA and serves as a cybersecurity expert and subject matter expert for major media outlets like CNN, Fox News, Information Security Magazine, and more. He holds dozens of cybersecurity certifications, including CISO, Certified Ethical Hacker, Certified Cloud Security Professional, and Licensed Penetration Tester. Eric Galis is the CISO at Cengage, and he's an accomplished security and risk leader with over 19 years of experience in information security and risk and compliance. His expertise lies in process improvement, security monitoring, data protection, and system and application security. Prior to his role at Cengage, Eric led security teams and programs at Pearson and Houghton Mifflin, focusing on ensuring the security of education software and publishing products. As a security leader, Eric places great value on coaching and developing team members and providing them with vision and guidance for success. In his tenure at Cengage, Eric has built robust IT and cybersecurity apprenticeship pathways. And today, over 25% of our security team here at Cengage was hired through this internal training pipeline. So both of these experts have deep experience, not only in the field of cybersecurity, but what does it take to get somebody into the entry level and up through a career, which we know. And there's been so much that we've talked about that in this space around the problem space. So we know that there's over 750,000 job openings in cyber right now. And despite all of the training that's happening in cyber, we know that demand is still going to project outpace supply over the next 10 years. But we all hear about this problem space all the time, and what we don't hear about are what are the solutions to actually close that gap. And I think what we'll hear a little bit from Keatron and from Eric today is that it is not actually always a problem of their supply is not there. What we see is that there's a challenge in how we hire and how we onboard and how we actually bring people up through the ranks. And there are real opportunities to close that gap. Some of them are really evident in what Eric has done here at Cengage and in much of what Keatron has seen across the industry and as opportunities. So, but before we jump into that conversation, the one thing we want to do is hear from you. What are the current ways that your organization is filling these talent gaps? What have you tried? We know from many of Infosec's customers, and you should see this on the screen right now, a poll. And so please go ahead and submit your answers. What do we see as what people have tried in order to support their cyber talent pipelines? Internal upskilling, we know that Infosec has supported companies to do that for quite some time. Contract hires, staffing companies, hire, train, deploy models, which are in apprenticeships, these simulated versions. You can just click on, this is multiple select, so any one of those. I see 6% of people have already done that. I would restructuring your cyber org to create more entry-level opportunities. We've seen many organizations create more entry-level so they can create more of a pyramid structure and bring people up. Targeted university recruiting. Many companies have direct relationships with with universities that help supply that cyber talent. Military recruiting, we know this is very popular and significant, or other. Is there another thing that you've been doing that has been really important to to fill that talent pipeline? All right, I see about 25% of people have submitted so far. Would love to get that a little bit higher. Thank you all for your perspective. And the reason that we want to know is because we want to be able to have this conversation serve actually your needs. What have you been trying? And then towards the end of this conversation, we'll start approaching those barriers. I've worked in workforce now, as I said, for a dozen years, and all of these can be successful ways for companies to really bring in new talent. But there are structural things within cybersecurity that make it a unique industry, and how to onboard, how to train, clearances, certifications, et cetera, that are really required. All right, I'm going to see if I can get just a couple more people to submit. All right, and let's look at those results. So here's what we see. The majority have tried internal upskilling and contract hires. Much smaller on these hire, train, deploy, apprenticeship. A number of people have tried apprenticeships, which is really exciting. Restructuring, all of that. So it's really interesting. And I can't wait to hear about those others. So if there are great examples, please drop them in the Q&A, and we will make sure that we sort of talk about them later. Again, the conversation today, we really want to focus on that solution space and what is possible to solve that huge gap that is coming. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the real experts here in the industry, Eric and Keatron.
All right, thank you very much, Raya. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for joining us. So I kind of want this to go in more of a conversational direction, and I want to start that just by asking you, Eric. I know we talk about these things all the time. We have our one-on-one meetings, but what advice or guidance would you give to new cyber people interested in joining your org? And this is because even as I look at the questions here in the list, right away, the first question I saw was someone asking a question around that. And it's probably one of the top questions I get. So you're the CISO, you're the head of the cybersecurity organization in Cengage. What advice could you give candidly to people that would be looking to join your org if they don't have a cybersecurity background?
Yeah, and I think there's kind of three main things that we look at. So the first is having the right mindset. We're looking for people who want to understand how things work, or don't, because that's what cybersecurity is all about, right? It's figuring out where you can break things. It's really about a mindset that you want to take apart things and understand the problem right down to its core. And so having that mindset, or fostering that mindset, is the first step. The second thing is around opportunities to showcase your skills outside of just the traditional education path, right? This is things like capture the flags and those kind of competitions, hack the box, anything like that, where you can get out there and put your skills to work, or in the early days of the work that you're doing, really hone those skills in a practical way. I think we were chatting about this earlier, and you had said something, to the effect of, if you found someone who came in like even top 10 at a DEF CON or, other conference, capture the flag, like that's a great candidate. And that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. Because even if you went to DEF CON and came in 10th, you're still in like the top 1% of the world of performers. So we'd definitely be interested in talking to that person.
Yeah. And then the last one, that third one I was talking about, is really around education. So staying up to date on trends, attacks, different things that are happening, and then certifications. And certifications is kind of this mixed bag, and I have mixed feelings about it. But I look at the certifications as not a means to an end. It is a demonstration of your willingness and drive to continue your educational journey. So the certifications themselves, they have different ones, have different levels of value, right? Depending on what job and where they're coming from. But the path to get to them shows that continuous learning, which is a key component for anyone that's going to be successful in cybersecurity.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll push back a little bit on that. I think with the certifications, what's happened is the biggest value that you get out of certifications a lot of times ends up being the course that you take towards that certification. So if you can get with a good training company, get with a good instructor, the preparation for that certification may be more valuable sometimes than the certification itself. And then not to mention the networking that you get with other people that are in that cohort or in that class that are preparing for that same certification. Because in my years of teaching certification courses, what I find is there's people that are in there that have tremendous skills, but they need that certification for their job. And there are people that are in there getting the certification because they're trying to get a job. And the connection between the people that are already seasoned and really skilled and the people that are trying to get in, the synergy that happens there to where the people that are skilled end up becoming somewhat mentors and start teaching a little bit in the class. I think that's very valuable. So that path to certification, I think, is sometimes the better value than just the certification itself.
Yeah, I think we completely agree on that fact, right? It's not necessarily that end point. It's the way that you're getting there.
Absolutely. So the types of alternative hiring solutions and processes, how have these solutions that you've implemented, for example, in Cengage, how have you and your team come up with these things and how are they working out? Because we know you're kind of one of the leaders, one of the trailblazers in the industry of these alternative hiring methods. So how did you come up with some of your ideas and how are things working out with that?
Yeah, so I've been lucky to have some leadership that really is supportive of these different ways of attacking that cybersecurity gap skills gap that you talked about at the beginning here. And we started out with kind of dipping our feet into that alternative path with internal upskilling, which I think everyone does to a certain extent. And hopefully the culture at your company can support that, and you can have that conversation with the rest of the organization in a way that's driving it forward, because sometimes there's a little bit of territorialism. I would hope that you can avoid that. We don't have that here at all, which gave us a great pool of people to go and look at and say, who is interested in cybersecurity and where can we pull from? And then the skills part, we can train that, right? So you have great programs within Infosec, right? We have all sorts of resources out there of training people on the specific skills around cybersecurity, but finding the right people with, like I said, that mindset and that continuous education. That's where the internal upskilling worked. And then the second was then being able to move to apprenticeships and looking at apprenticeships. So we partner with a company to provide that. So they have helped us through the process of getting the apprenticeship registered within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where we were headquartered, as well as providing the staff. And again, I credit our leadership. Our CTO, Jim Chilton, was one of the people who helped sponsor that group to get into the Commonwealth and get these programs started and really drive apprenticeship across all of IT, not just in cybersecurity. And we found that we're getting great people through both of these programs because of the hunger. They are actively looking to get in, and again, focusing on that mindset. And that's the way that we look at apprenticeships, is really who's going to be a good fit for the right mindset at the beginning of that apprenticeship. And then the training, again, comes after we've already looked at them for having those problem-solving skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned Jim Chilton. We've both been a beneficiary of being under his leadership. He's a great leader and definitely allows us to be forward-thinking in how we approach these things. And with what you just said, so on the flip side of that, what advice would you give other CISOs that are running into these challenges that maybe haven't explored some of the alternative routes that you have?
Yeah, I think the first place is to make friends with HR, because the biggest hurdle that I do a lot of advocacy for apprenticeship within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And the biggest thing that people come to us if they're hiring managers is we can't even get to the point where we take a 2 or 4 year degree off of entry level positions. That is the first step to any of this. That gives you a different pool of potential employees right off the bat by just getting rid of that. So go make friends with your HR, with your recruiting part of your company, and see if you can make that one change, right? Can you take that off? Because it opens up the people who may have gone out and gotten all these certifications that really show that drive to learn and didn't come up through a 4 or 2 year program. But Keatron, I put this one back into this question back to you. Like, what other thoughts do you think that help overcome some of the challenges people have?
Yeah, I definitely think part of it is, the big part of it is partnering with HR and also just looking in non-traditional places. I don't come from, when I joined cybersecurity, almost 20 years ago, most people that were my peers had degrees in computer science or computer engineering or something along those lines, and I did not. So I think that one big thing is looking in non-traditional places and going about, looking at non-traditional backgrounds as far as talent. And that includes, trying to diversify like your workforce and where you bring in the talent from. Because again, if you look at the definition of non-traditional, I checked the mark of all of those. Didn't have a computer science degree, didn't come from the typical background, didn't come from the typical learning. And what I found over the years of mentoring and teaching is you find absolute jewels that have no experience with computer science, not even any real formal experience with computers. I always tell people the best pen tester I've ever had on my team was a person. She came from a liberal arts background, had nothing to do with computers, but she was curious. So she read and she was interested in, hacking magazines and things like that, and asked lots of questions. And I noticed the first time I interviewed her, she didn't have a background and didn't know what the next steps were, but her problem solving abilities, right, were off the charts. So she didn't know the answer, but she knew how to research and figure out what the next step is really quickly. And that's why I picked that person over people that had a lot more experience doing actual pen testing. And I don't regret that hire. She's turned out to be the best pen tester I've ever had. So I think looking in those non-traditional locations, looking at non-traditional backgrounds, and just seeing if that person can actually do the role, I think is much more important than what their background, degree status, et cetera is.
Yeah, I agree completely. So
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, so, you talked about this pen tester that it turned out, didn't have that experience, but turned out to be the best pen tester you've ever worked with. What are some of the roles that you feel lend themselves well to these alternative paths, and why?
So definitely if you're looking to do something technical, I think kind of, universally we look at like an entry-level SOC analyst, for example. And that's because an entry-level SOC analyst, there is a ton of hand-holding, you're taught a lot, you're told what to do a lot, you're looking at tickets and deciding, where they go and that type of thing. So I think it's a good point of entry from people coming from anywhere. If you're looking to do something that's not so technical, maybe management or policy, procedure, auditing, I think a lot of those roles lend well to that. And when I say entry level, because in the industry, we have to clarify, there's two definitions of entry level. One is you have no IT experience at all, nothing IT, computer technology related. That's one definition of entry level. And then we have another of you've got a lot of IT experience, but no cyber experience, right? So when we say entry level, we have to make sure we quantify which one we're talking about. And specifically now I'm speaking to the one on the left side, which is the one that have no experience with IT or cyber. Those roles I think are very, there's not as many of them, but some of the things that I've seen where people are creating more of those roles is going to help out a lot. But definitely SOC analysts, anyone that has anything to do with policies and procedure. Information assurance is another one that's not mentioned a lot, but especially on the government, military, and intelligence side, I see people entering in that information assurance realm with no experience and being very successful.
Excellent. And I think there's something there, and with one of the questions that have come up from the audience about some of the other benefits of bringing people through this alternative path that I think we've talked around a little bit, but haven't hit directly, which is, so you said in the SOC, you have people who require a lot more hand-holding, right? It's an earlier stage career path for a lot of people in cybersecurity. But I think that part is critical to a team's success overall. So, somebody had asked like about the pen testing and what kind of training and hand-holding is required to get somebody from no experience at all to being a fantastic pen tester. And I think one of the things that apprenticeship has unlocked for my team is given an opportunity to so many people across the team to lead. And I'm not talking about manage. This isn't like doing all the HR stuff. It's truly lead. They have to think about the path from just getting certifications and just getting classroom time to a productive member of the team, and what that path looks like and how they can build on experience after experience for that individual to get them to that point. And thinking about that and thinking about what that means to be successful in your area, what you are responsible for, what you're already a cybersecurity expert potentially in, I think deepens that expertise and makes you a better candidate for leadership later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. And we've seen that, right? Like we've seen that happen over and over and over again. So it's not just a general idea. It's actually proven out several times.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's several people on my team that started as individual contributors. And when we brought in apprentices, they were partnered as like their mentor, helped them build their work plan, worked very closely with them. And they quickly became more of a thought leader in that and more of just a leader, right? So it's just teaching gives you that reinforcement of whatever subject matter that you don't always get from different approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spent a lot of my career teaching, and mentoring, and absolutely it kind of gives you a foundation that it's hard to get in other ways. And one of the other things I've seen too is as I go out, and this kind of ties into your apprenticeship programs and some of your alternative hiring methods, I've went out and talked to SOC leaders and incident response leaders and leaders of cybersecurity teams and said, give me 2 roles that you're looking to hire for. And I would take the role, look at the job description, and I'd say, all right, let's be honest here. Out of these 20 things that you have as requirements, how many of these things does the person that sit in this role today, how many of these 20 things do they actually do ever? Yeah. And surprisingly, a lot of times the answer I get back is, well, out of these 20 things, they actually just do these 4 things. And I'm like, all right, well, let's think about something crazy here. What if we look for candidates that either A, could do these 4 things really well, even though they didn't do the other 16, or we were able to quickly train someone to do these 4 things really well? Would that be attractive to you? And most of them said, yeah, because that's actually what the job is. So that takes us to one of our next talking points, which again is partnering with HR. How do you feel about that?
So again, I think I've been extremely lucky. We had a very supportive HR department here at Cengage. But yeah, that really is the crux of where this starts. And people feel like there's a certain amount of risk in paring down a job description, because you're like, well, what if I missed something and then it turns out to be critical later on? And I think that's a mindset we have to overcome, and we have to help our HR partners overcome as well, of like trying to jam everything like the kitchen sink into a job description. It's like, okay, well, their main job is an analyst, but maybe they'll do some engineering work on the side as part of the team. So let's just throw some of the engineer stuff in there too. Yeah. And really making sure you're staying focused on what are the key capabilities of that job. And if you need to go and stretch them outside of that, again, that should be learning opportunity. It should be a way to build people and to grow people, both the person that you're looking to hire into that role and the people who would have to help them along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's several, we have to look at the root cause of some of that too, right? Because looking back at it over time, as I've watched this industry evolve, what we had is the opposite problem in the past, where people would come with, having a certification or a certificate or a degree, and people hire them and put them in a job role and they can't actually do the job. They can't do the things that certification says. So I think as a result of that, almost like a lot of our legal documents, right? It just kind of grew into like this one big run-on sentence, because you would hire someone, they met all these things, but they couldn't actually do the job. So we add other things. So I think over time there's been some bloat because of that, because hiring managers have gotten shy about not making sure, as you said, that they cover absolutely every single thing. But also, I think another part of it too is when I look back at when I took my first cybersecurity course way back many years ago, most of the people that were in that course with me had lots of certifications, lots of degrees, and years of experience. So I think what happens is a lot of times when these people become leaders, we have to caution them to be careful not to make it as if anyone that comes into that role or comes into a role similar to that has to have your background, because we have a habit of gatekeeping and writing job descriptions to where if that person doesn't meet at least what I have, then they're not qualified to do the job that I was doing, right? So we have to kind of start coaching in people and thinking about that, because I see that as one of the root causes of why these job descriptions are so bloated.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. There is a bias to look for people that look like you in whatever that means, right? Whether that's the way that you approach a problem, your educational background. We do have this internal bias, and part of being able to embrace these alternate paths is having the openness to look outside of that and overcome that. That is a great point.
Yep. I remember interviewing, being on an interview board for a big company, and they had me in and they were interviewing a candidate. And this person, they asked him, tell me the difference between, how does a SHA-256 hash work? And tell me the difference between just regular hashing and something like HMAC, right? And the candidate didn't know. He was just like, yeah, I'm not really sure about that. And one of the people on the review board with me was like, yeah, we can't hire that person. He doesn't even know what HMAC is. I'm like, yeah, but he literally wrote a 0 day. So if you're hiring a security researcher, like, how does that not weigh more than the fact that he didn't memorize what HMAC is, right? So it's those types of things where a lot of times when we're interviewing people, we have these scripts, and if someone misses 5 out of 10 questions, we're automatically like, well, that person, they don't know enough, we should send them back. And I've done some testing on this, went undercover and interviewed at some places for some roles. And I'll tell you, some of the questions that they asked that are based on pure memorization, I didn't necessarily know the answers to. So based on their criteria, I wasn't qualified, for that job that I was mock interviewing for, that I was absolutely qualified for. So that's some of the other things I think that are keeping people from non-traditional, diverse backgrounds out of some of these roles, is that very thing where we kind of stack it like that. And I believe if we take those barriers down, that gap may not disappear that we're talking about, but I think it'll shrink a lot.
That's a great point. I think just looking at your interview questions and asking yourself, should I be asking this of Google or of a person? That's a great place to start, right? And if the answer is Google, then you're saying it's memorization, and that's just testing a person's ability to cram information into their mind and retain it. It's not going to test whether they can help you solve the problems that your organization faces.
Yeah. And that's why I'm a fan of, like, look, if I'm hiring you for a pen tester role, like, the interview questions are great, but here's a login to an online environment with a cyber range and some vulnerable VMs and a Kali VM. You got an hour, come back in an hour and tell me what you found, what you were able to break into. Like, if I'm hiring for a pen tester role, that does it. If I'm hiring for a management role, let me give you some scenarios, like some security management scenarios, and let you read through them and give you an hour to go through and answer some of those scenarios, and let me just see how you approach solving that cybersecurity management problem. I think that's much more valuable intel on a candidate than memorizing, 20 definitions, which, by the way, that list of 20 will be something different, in 6 months anyways.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think AI really kind of blows that wide open, that whole discussion of how you have to think of things, because we recently had to do some testing around AI for penetration testing, and it's a different. You can't just take. OWASP did end up coming out with a list, so they have some things to do, but you couldn't just take the same approach that you had for doing injection or validation of input and say, like, okay, it matches exactly the same way. You had to think about what will break the model, and that is not something you can memorize, right? So
right. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I'm doing some chat GPT stuff with buffer overflows and heap overflows right now, just in the spirit of the libwebp vulnerability from we. And even myself, like looking at how I like all the Python scripts I've written over the years to speed up the process of finding, where that bound is not checked or identified or defined in the code, and being able to create an overflow situation there. Like, definitely AI has sped up my process for doing that. And that's, I think we need to, if we're looking for those roles, we need to look at people that are thinking that way. And again, they may not come from traditional backgrounds.
Yep, completely agree.
All right. So I want to jump into something a little more close to you here. So let's talk about CISO, because that's in most people's minds and in most of the world, CISO is kind of like the top, right? That's the leader of the whole cybersecurity organization in most orgs. And you've gotten to that role, and your path wasn't necessarily traditional either. And it's not like you're just a CISO. You're recognized as a very good CISO, forward-thinking, got the skills, you execute very well. So with that being the case, what was your path, and what advice would you give others as far as how to get to that role eventually? Because even when I talk to entry-level people, they have nothing, they have no experience, they know nothing, but they'll tell me right up like, hey, I want to be like the top person. I want to be a CISO in 5 years or however many years. So if you're not telling me something to take me down that path, I don't want to hear it. Like, I don't want to hear I got to go learn a bunch of Linux commands and Windows commands. I want to know how to get to that role. So what would you say to people that are interested in getting to where you are?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the very kind words that you used as part of the question there. And I'll start by saying that a CISO, whether you think of it or not as a monolithic thing, it is not. So there is not like a model for a CISO, and once you get to a certain point in every organization, you do the same things. I have a great peer network that I have, in every single one of them does different things in their organization based on what industry they're in, what their team size is, what their background is. So it's not a one size fits all. Every experience is a little bit different. There's some CISOs that I know that keep their hands on the keyboard. They're still doing a lot of technical stuff. I wish I could do more of that. I don't have I have a good sized team here. We have a bunch of different business units that we're responsible for. So I am not as technically sharp as I used to be, unfortunately. But everyone has a different experience to get there. But you have to start with some foundation. And so, I started in a more traditional way. I was in as a computer science program. So as I was going through that, really learned I did not want to be a developer. Like, that was what they were training you for in that particular program, and that's not where I wanted to go. So I ended up finding an opportunity in cybersecurity. I had one course of cybersecurity in that program. It sounded really interesting, but we didn't get deep enough for me to be an expert or even employable. But it was a time when there was demand. There wasn't a lot of programs, so it wasn't like you could get a cybersecurity or information security or any kind of degree like that, or even a specialization within most computer science programs. So they were investing a lot of time in training people up. And I went to a consultancy at PwC, and that was a great experience because you get to see so many different organizations. I think similar to what you're talking about, right? It's not just, all right, this is the way the company that I work at does things. You're brought in because there's a specific problem in a different company all the time. So you get this great broad view. So that was really foundational. But I also had specific things that I got really deep on early on in my career. I think that's critical to being successful later on, because you have to have, And it's not going to be everything. I am not an expert in every single part of what my team does, but there are a few that I have a lot of experience in. Application security, so did some systems integrations work around DLP back in the day. So there's these areas that you went deep on, and it gives you that ability as a leader to know the expertise level of the folks that you're working with, their weaknesses, their strengths, and then put them together in effective ways. And I always use this analogy of a hallway, because you said, what is it going to be that gets me to that point, to that level, right? That's what people ask. And I think it's great to have a destination. So I think of it like a hallway. And I'm walking down this hallway, and so that's my career. And at the end of the hallway is a door. And for the longest time, that door was CISO. And that's the direction that's where I wanted to go. That was the direction I was walking in. But you have to be continuously walking forward with taking on opportunities and looking left and right to the doors that are opening up on either side of that hallway. Yeah. So it's not always going to be a straight path, and it's often better when it's not, because it gives you experience that helps you grow in multiple dimensions. Because like I said, you can't just be, as a CISO, an expert in one part of security, the part that you've gone deep in your whole career. You have to be able to understand enough of it to be dangerous to a certain extent, right, across that. So it's an inch wide and a mile deep, but then you also have to be a mile deep in at least one area. I really feel like that's a critical part of that foundation that gets you there.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% see that point and agree with it. I mean, I almost look at it as, I used to game a lot, and a lot of the games that are out now and were out back then, you'd be trying to get to a certain point where you have to fight a boss or unlock a door or something like that. But along the way, there's key tools and weapons or whatever it is that you have to collect so that when you get there, you can unlock that door. And I look at what you just said in kind of that way. Yeah, you can get there a lot of different ways, but as you're going those different ways to get there, you need to be collecting some things on the way so that when you get there, you have the things to make up the key to unlock that door, to put you in that seat. And I think you summed it up really nicely there.
I like that analogy a lot.
Yeah. So what I think would be good now, Raya, I'd like to bring you back in. Yeah, Raya, I think you should jump back in here with us to mix it up a little bit.
All right. I was waiting with bated breath. I had a number of questions that I have for you guys, and there are obviously a number of questions in the Q&A that I want to make sure that we get to. Before we actually jump into the Q&A questions, though, Eric, I have a question for you, which is like, as you think about your job as a CISO, and Keatron, you may be able to answer this from your experience in the industry, how did the skills gap affect the business, right? What made you, I know that there was a personal motivation for you guys to look at apprenticeships and to really invest in that and invest in non-traditional talent pipelines, but what was the effect of the business from not being able to find the talent that you needed, and what's the effect now?
Yeah, and so the team's grown significantly since I joined Cengage. So in order to support that level of growth, there was no way we were going to do it just trying to get people from other organizations. And the way that manifests is by understanding the risk profile of the organization, but not necessarily being able to positively affect it in the way that you want and at the speed that you want. So a lot of work that we do is really working across the organization to reduce the risk in the way that we conduct business, the way that we come to our customers. And there is enough diversity in the way that we produce our content, the way that we distribute our content, and the way that we sell, that really you have to have a very strong team to be able to understand all of that. So there was a few places where up until very recently, we knew there was a risk, whether it would be an interruption to business, that we couldn't necessarily address the way that we wanted to because there was a bigger fire somewhere else. So being able to bring people in and scale them out, because again, it's about that breadth across this organization specifically because of the way that we operate was important. So being able to get somebody who really understood the problem, and then people who would help them scale that out into the organization. It was a great way that to bring apprentices in and start them down that path, because it gave them a bit to really kind of latch onto and grow as they did that.
Keatron, anything you want to add about business risk you've seen about not being able to find the skilled talent?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, some of the kind of gotcha things I've seen is organizations, because they can't find the talent, they just kind of put people in the role so that they can have that role filled. And then when something happens, like there's a data breach or, something along those lines, they at that point discover that they don't have people in those roles that can actually execute. So I think the biggest kind of hidden risk there is you're forced to put people in those roles that can't actually do the job. And when something actually happens, it looks very bad. And there's insurance issues and, other types of legal things that come with not being prepared and being negligent in those types of roles. So I think from a risk standpoint, I think that's one of the biggest ones. And it's also one of the ones that's kind of hidden and hard to see.
Can we talk about risk for a second? Because this has come up a little bit in the Q&A as well. And I just one of the reasons people don't hire so-called non-traditional talent or a talent that's really entry level is because of that risk, right? There's risk to the business. There's risk to can they do the job immediately? There's risk for the hiring manager wants the easiest hire possible, who's just going to be able to come in and get started on day one. So how do we address not the business risk or the security risk, but the human side of that risk when we're hiring talent that maybe needs more training or needs more mentorship or anything like that?
You want to go first, Eric?
Sure. Yeah, I've definitely got some thoughts on this one. So I would say the first thing to do is look at how long your roles are remaining open. So we have in our apprenticeship program, we have a year-long on-the-job training portion. We're seeing our apprentices are effective after 3 to 6 months, and they are already contributing at a high level. And they're learning too, but it's not just a learning experience for them anymore. So if your roles are staying open for more than 6 months, you have nobody there, nobody at all. So having somebody there that's going to contribute in potentially three months, maybe 6, that's a huge way to reduce that risk. And I think the other side is look at these paths that give you optionality. So we do apprenticeship. At the end of the year, you do have the option to hire or not hire. So having that optionality de-risks it. Now I'm going to say we have hired every single one of the apprentices we've brought through the program, right? Every one of them has been fantastic, and it's been a great experience. But if you don't have that experience, you do have that approach. You can use that approach to give you that the way to de-risk it after that year. Those are a couple of things that we've looked at. Keatron?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all that. And just to add to that, a lot of times I think Eric kind of hit on one of the big things there, that 3 to 6 month productivity time frame, I think is realistic. I think part of that risk is brought on by the hiring managers themselves, where they put this rollout and they expect that because they hire this person with all these degrees and things, that they're going to immediately hit the ground running and be productive right away. And, I think that's probably one of the bigger risks, is that we don't have realistic expectations of how long it's going to take for that person to become productive, right? So we kind of check it off as this person's productive, they're contributing value right away. And we do have those diamonds that come along every once in a while, but in most roles, I think that's kind of unrealistic to expect, that person to immediately be a big contributor. And I think we forget that sometimes, especially with the fast pace of how fast cyber is growing and how fast we're having to staff people.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that's an amazing point. And I think it actually compounds the risk of a person who you expect to have the experience versus someone who's through an alternative path. Because as a leader of that person, a manager or mentor, you are more intentional when you are bringing them in through like an internship or apprenticeship or co-op or some other path, as opposed to someone you expect to just be able to hit the ground running. And so you are actually doing a better job as a leader setting up that alternative path person for success. So I think it compounds and the risk kind of flips in the other direction. So I love that point, Keatron.
Yeah, and when I hire, like when I look at people, like that's like I look at the resume and the background, but at the end of the day, it's like, oh, you have zero experience, fine, let's get into this cyber range and see what you can do. Or, you got 10 years experience doing advanced pen testing, that's cool. Not that I don't trust you, but let's get in the cyber range and get down. Let me see what you actually got. Because you can't go off of what the resume says or what the degree or certificate says they're supposed to have, which is why I'm a huge fan of just the verification piece. Let's get it down to brass tacks. What can you actually do as far as performance in this job role? And I think if we start to focus on that more, we'll get that, we'll find that skills gap is a lot more solvable than it looks like it is now. Because if we look at the average job description, and I don't want to keep going back to that, most of the job descriptions that I read for a lot of cyber roles, the people that have what that job description says they're supposed to have, those people already have jobs and they're usually happy in their jobs. So if you could afford them, you wouldn't be able to get them anyways. And that's a really a good point for why we have to look at alternative hiring.
I love that point. But I do want to go back to one thing both of you guys started to say, which was, and a lot of the questions in the chat are on this too. What do we think about certs? What do we think about degrees? What do we think about skills? How do these actually all interrelate? And if certifications are like, they can't keep up with the pace of change, how do we actually then verify skills? How are we thinking through, how do we evaluate experience of someone who's applying to us? Is it the experience they have? Is it the certs that they have? How do we think about candidates? And you said that you talked about this a little bit at the beginning, Eric, but also candidates who have little experience. What do we look for?
I'll go first. So I'll be honest with you. The way I look at it, I've got my family's, we have a lot of truck drivers, transportation businesses and stuff like that. And the way I look at it, we had this problem some years ago where our requirement to be a truck driver was you had to have a valid U.S. driver's license in whatever state. And we found very quickly that, driving in rural Mississippi is not the same as driving downtown Chicago, for example. So that requirement wasn't necessarily good enough. So what we had to do is we would get people in a truck and say, take us to O'Hare Airport, bring us back downtown, now take us to this place. And that was kind of the interview. Can you navigate that city traffic? And I look at certifications and degrees as like the driver's license, right? That is your minimum, you can enter based on that. You can have that or not, because at the end of the day, whether you have it or not, I'm still going to put you in the truck and say, can you take me to O'Hare Airport and get me back without us getting in an accident? So I think the verification piece and the skills verification piece is kind of key to that. The degrees and the certifications, I think, should be like bonuses or icings on the cake. If I find two people that can actually do that task, one of them have degrees and certs and one of them don't, then maybe the certification becomes a value if I'm putting them on a contract that requires that certification, for example. But I don't think the degrees and certification should be the entry point. I think the skill should be the entry point, and the degrees and certification should be add-ons, values to that. And that's my own way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I think, again, I love analogies, and I love the way that you worked in the truck driving into this and kind of drew that parallel. For me, it's not the ends, it's the path, right? So like Keatron said, there's a lot of great content in the training that gets you to these certifications. There's a lot of good people in those trainings. There's the instructor, there is your fellow classmates. So it is an entire experience. And the certification may get old, it may not, it may be evergreen. Everyone's a little bit different. But you can't change the fact that you went through and you put in the time to learn and you made connections along the way. I think that is a lot of what we look for. And then on the skills verification side, yeah, at certain levels, you got to verify that that they have specific skills. When you're looking at entry levels, you should be thinking about, can the person learn, not do they come fully formed with a whole tool bag of skills that take a normal practitioner years in order to establish.
Yeah.
One of the things that I hear all the time, particularly in technology, and I think it's probably even faster in cyber, is like the half-life of skills is just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And so I think that what both of you are saying is that like it sort of almost doesn't matter what somebody comes with right now, because if you're going to be a cybersecurity professional, you have to be good at learning, and you have to be good at investing in learning and continuing to learn, and you have to have the internal structures to support your employees to continuously learn. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I look at it as like exercise and things like that. Like, for example, I'm not a runner. Like, people in my family are runners. I've never been a runner. Like, I hate running long distance, but I do lift weights from time to time. And I can tell you, like, if I go on a tear of lifting, 5 days a week for 2 months straight, I have certain gains that come with that. But then if I don't lift for 2 weeks, suddenly it's almost like I start over, like I lost a lot in that time that I wasn't lifting. And I look at cybersecurity skills as the same. Things change so fast, and what matters and what's at the top of the news cycle and what people are being compromised by changes so fast that you have to make sure that you constantly got your foot in the door of learning. It's not like you can learn and then step away and just work and not learn. You have to constantly have one foot in the door of learning new things and keeping up with what's happening.
Yeah. There's one more question here, Keatron, that I really want to ask you. And before we do that, I just want to shout out the apprenticeship partner that Cengage uses, and that we have burgeoning partnerships with Infosec to also bring new talent to market, is Apprenti. And they are a wonderful partner, and have really, as Eric said, we've hired every single apprentice that has come out of that program. Keatron, but I want to say Infosec is launching Infosec Talent, and I see some of these questions in the Q&A from recruiters, from people asking about interview questions, about the skills, and how they get verified. Why is Infosec now entering into this talent business? Why do we think that we have a unique ability to really bring talent to employers and create these alternative pipelines?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So I think in the root of it, is when we look at the industry, we have two sides. We have the people that are trying to get into cyber that are telling me, I've gotten these certifications, I've applied to jobs, I'm not getting callbacks, I'm not getting interviews. What is the secret? How do I get in? Whereas on the employer side, we've got employers saying, we have all these roles open, we can't find people. And when we do get someone into that role, they can't actually do the job. And I think we're somewhat uniquely positioned to get in the middle and say, look, we've been a leader in boot camps for many years. We've been a leader in asynchronous training and skills verification for many years. And now we have unparalleled access to talent, unparalleled access to significant resources through our parent Cengage. So because of that perfect meeting of combination of the stars aligning and things happening when they did, I think we're uniquely positioned to help and partner with organizations and individuals to address that problem and take those two sides and bring them together. So I think that's why we've gotten into it now. And we're just starting to see the results. And I think it's going to be great, and it's going to be transformational for our industry.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think this idea of skills validation, skills verification, you know, how do you take that truck and drive it to O'Hare, right? How do you actually show an employer what you can do? We are in a unique position to do that. Eric, Keatron, I've learned a lot from you today. I really appreciate your time. I hope we answered enough of the questions that were posed here today. This recording will be sent out to all participants. If you want it, I just want to give you both the chance to say a final word, any advice to people looking to enter the industry or any employers who want to hire.
Eric, you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm going to do my plea on the employer side. Sorry. The first step is to start to normalize this and make it not be alternative paths, make it be the path. So it is working with HR to make sure you're not losing those candidates, and whether that's taking control of the pipeline more through partnering with like an apprentice where they bring candidates to us and you don't have that filtering at the beginning, taking out too many of the requirements from the job description and that degree. That's, you know, job one, everyone take the degree requirement out. That's the first barrier to entry that stops so many people. So it's up to all of us that are leaders in cybersecurity to start to affect change in the way that we bring people in. We need to make this the norm, not the alternative.
Keatron, last word.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100% with everything Eric just said. And for those of you on the talent side that are looking to get in, like, we hear you, trust me, we got you. We're working on the employer side to get that perfect so that when we open the floodgates for all of you to start coming in, we have a way to get you into that role that's your dream role and have you doing what you want to do. So we hear you, we're working on it diligently, and we got something coming for you. So just be patient, but keep training, keep preparing, because we're going to make some opportunities happen for you.
I love it. As we know, this is not a supply problem. There are skilled, qualified, exciting people ready to do these roles. And Eric, Keatron, I couldn't have better partners in this effort. And thank you both for your leadership.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.